somebody who has filled in some spot that I normally take hold of. I've tried to develop to be a song leader my whole life. I've tried to develop to be a Bible class teacher and a preacher for a long, long time. And then for the last month, I've watched people do such a good job of it. I'm like, well, either they've been working really hard at it, or it's just taking me a lot more longer to a lot of work to get anywhere at it. But y'all just, it's amazing the work that goes on here, and how many people there are here that we can count on, and the hands that we've got pulled together. And I just want to say, Austin, for filling in this part of Bible class and working with Alan. The two of them, I think, have done a great job going through the narrative, challenging sections at some points, major sections in certain sections, and just have done an amazing job, and would have been happy for them to have just carried on with it. But I made the decision before all of this happened to me that we were going to cover Proverbs. And before all of this, we were going to have like 5 classes or so to cover it. And I thought that would have been good. We're not quite sure how good it's going to be now. We're going to do the best we can. And I'll talk about how we'll do that in just a second. But what I want to do as we think about Proverbs, we're going to have 3 classes basically until this quarter is over. And I think what we're going to try to do as best as we can is just kind of get a flavor of what the book of Proverbs does. Some of you, I made mention 3 months ago, basically, to kind of do some reading in the Proverbs, and maybe you've had an opportunity to do that, and maybe you've seen some differences in it. Here's what I'm kind of thinking. Tonight, my goal is to do basically an introduction to the book of Proverbs. We'll talk to how kind of the way the book is put together, and then basically focus on chapters 1 through 9, because if you have read Proverbs, you'll notice they're a little bit different than like 10 through the end of the book. They're not as much, they are kind of like one sentence, but they are more grouped together, one sentence kind of points. When you get from 10 really to like chapter 29, we'll talk about this more in just a second, that's a lot of just like one sentence Proverbs, one sentence life lessons. I think we can make some distinctions between some of those. And then 30 and 31 are a little bit different. We'll talk about that in just a second. 1 through 9, I think, really are an introduction to what the book of Proverbs is trying to do. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that tonight. And we're going to invite you to make whatever comments you feel comfortable making, and we'll try to make that as comfortable as possible. And if we run out of time with 1 through 9, that'll be okay, because I really think there are a lot of points that are re-emphasized through all of that, and the point is just to drive it home over and over as you make your way into chapter 10, so we'll talk about that more in a second. So hopefully you've got your Bible, you've got it opened up to the book of Proverbs, and we'll look at that in just a second. Alan, you have anything you want to say as of right now?
I think just to keep in mind, and something that I've not thought of in the past, is Proverbs are general truths.
That's
They're
right.
not, it doesn't apply across the board 100%. And so that's something to keep in mind. It is very good, and we need to take it to heart, but it isn't always applicable in every situation you run into.
That's right. Well, you see something, I think maybe the most common one we may talk about, maybe Sunday nights, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. And somebody says, I did everything I could, I did the best I could, and look where they are now. I think what we do with that, I think it's reasonable to say this is the principle that is generally true. I think that's right, but it's not like a prophecy or something like that. And we'll see a lot of that in 1 through 9 and really 10 through 15, which I think is where it's very like a black and white presented case, right? The righteous will be blessed, the wicked will be cursed. And you might look around at the world and say, I don't know if the Proverbs writer has it all right. You know what I mean? Like, maybe, what was he looking at when he says that the wicked were going to be cursed? What was he looking at when he said that the righteous were always going to have the easy, comfortable, peaceful, long life? Like, that's not the way it always works. No, but generally, wise people do have greater benefits, and foolish people do have greater. I mean, we look around at the world and we see people who have made foolish decisions and have ended up in rough situations. right? And so we see that wisdom even though we understand it's not true every time. And I think we'll see a lot of that, maybe even more in 1 through 9, because that's basically, we'll talk about that more in just a second. So just hold on. Let's do this. So let's kind of look at the Proverbs structure. Most of the time when we think of the Proverbs structure, I think we do think of just hundreds of verses of individual ones. And that's true. We got 1 through 9, which I think is an introduction to wisdom and folly. We'll come back to that in just a second. That's where we're going to spend most of our time in some ways. But I would say this. Why don't we look at chapter 1, verses 1 through 9 first. Sorry, it took me a second. Chapter 1, 1 through 9. Who does it say these Proverbs belong to or come from? From Solomon, that's right, the son of David, king of Israel. Now, some of these might be ones he's collected, some of these might be ones he's written, but he's obviously a very wise man. And there are obviously some historical backgrounds to that we can talk about from, especially like 1 Kings would be a good place to talk about it. Now, I realize that we haven't made it that far in the class as far as in the historical timeline. But this was a good place in the class. Leaving off with 2 Samuel 8 was a good point to leave off. It always left places. So like 2 times ago, I think Brother Lonnie took us through Job. Last time I went through an overview of Psalms, so I was trying to use this way in a different way, and that's why I'm putting it here. So just keep in mind that we're in David's son's, Solomon's reign, basically, with all of this. And so I think about a passage like 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 29. And God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of understanding in his heart, like the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. And he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal. And the renown of his name was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He spoke of all animals and birds and creeping things and fish. And men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. I think it's like 6 or 7 or more times that the word wisdom is used there. You also have the word discernment that is used there. You have the word understanding, emphasizing how much of the picture Solomon sees. Now, I think we should think about that idea of wisdom for just a second. So the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job are all considered wisdom literature. Sometimes people include Song of Solomon, and some Psalms are kind of wisdom literature potentially. But Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job are really like the really clear wisdom literature. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get us to think about, how does life work? What's the kind of like the meaning behind life and things like that. So somebody described it like this. I think that the person in Proverbs is kind of like Solomon on the front edge of everything, where he's just like looking at the world, he's looking at his success, he's looking at his wisdom and how it leads to success, he's looking at his relationship with God on the early end, and I think he's looking at all the blessings that come from that. And so somebody, the question might be, what's the good life? And I think that's what Proverbs answering. Now, Ecclesiastes, I think, might be on the alternate edge of that. I think it's on the very end of life, looking back and saying, what happens if you pursue earthly things in a bad way? So it's not exactly the same question, but it is asking, what's a good life? Proverbs will say a lot about like work and industry and maybe honesty and things like that in dealings, and a lot of that will help you. That's not all that there is to the story, and I think Ecclesiastes adds that. And then I think Job says, here's a wise man who lives wisely, and his life is like what you would think the wicked are deserving. Wait a second, there were three friends who are like quoting Proverbs. There are literally things that the friends of Job say that are basically quotations from the Proverbs, right? The righteous receive blessings and the wicked receive curses. And Job's like, yeah, but I'm not wicked, So it's like, how do we put all these things together? And so I really think that the answer is to read them all together. I don't think it's to say, well, Proverbs says this and Job says this and Ecclesiastes says this. We just take them each one. No, we put them all together and we say, the picture is complex. Proverbs is true. Job is true. Ecclesiastes is true. But we all kind of lay them on top of each other. Is that helpful? I think you know those things, but I think thinking about those things together is helpful. Anything about its context or anything about that you would like to say about it?
I don't think so.
Okay. What do you think about the word wisdom? When you think about what the word wisdom means, what do you think? Knowledge. Knowledge is an important part of wisdom. What else? Experience. Yeah, a lot of people, when they talk about wisdom, it's more than just knowing the facts, but it's like having a personal knowledge and an experiential knowledge so that you can act this out in some way. What else?
I think it's actually a godly gift that has been given to you, like when Solomon asked for wisdom.
Okay.
It says in the Bible, it says that you need anything to ask of God. I think you can learn wisdom, but I think the wisdom that comes from God and then reading His Word is way more profound than anything that you could learn in school.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So this is okay. I think that's helpful. Let's think about it this way. I think that when we think about wisdom, you made mention at the beginning about godliness, and there is a wisdom. There is like a worldly wisdom, but Proverbs will talk about worldly wisdom, right? Like what it takes to get ahead with just that in mind. But then there is a divine wisdom. There's a wisdom that comes from God. And one thing that I think is helpful is that the word wisdom, it's the Hebrew word something like chokmah or something like that. But it's not just used of like cases like Solomon who knows a lot of things, or cases of other, mental gifted people. So in Exodus 31, when Moses brings on the people to build the tabernacle, God gifts these people who are like responsible for the creating of all of these things. He gifts them with this same word, chokmah, wisdom, right? Which basically is like, it's not just the knowledge, it's the ability to carry out the things you know in a helpful and effective way, right? So you might think of somebody who, well, all of us in here, right, know the truths of God's Word, right? The wisest of us are those who are able to step out into our workplace or with our families or into wherever and live that out. That's wisdom. And I think that's how that illustration helps us with Exodus 31, that same word being used. It's more like trying to see how God's will applies, how we live in keeping with God's design for the way that the universe is supposed to flow. Look at this in chapter 1, verse 32 of Proverbs. There's a couple of passages there, and I think this principle is super helpful. At the end of 32, it says, the complacency of the fools will destroy them. Basically, this is the rejection of listening to what God's Word has to say. They're going to be ruined by that. That's going to lead to their end. But he, verse 33, who listens to me shall dwell securely. That's the principle. That's what we need to hold on to, is that foolishness, which is the rejection of listening to God, is going to put you in disastrous situations. And listening to God, heeding Him, is going to put you in a secure situation. There's one other phrase that's important. Well, maybe not just one, but a key one. Look at 1 verse 7. The fear of the Lord, or the fear of Yahweh, is the beginning of knowledge. That phrase, the fear of Yahweh, shows up several times. And that's a really key phrase too. So we've talked about wisdom, and I think what we mean by that is this idea of knowing what God wants and then learning how to incorporate that into our day-to-day lives. I'm sorry I'm talking so much.
It's okay.
But What about, it's been a few weeks since I've gotten done talking. What about this idea of the fear of the Lord? What do you think that means uniquely? Like, Proverbs is one of those places where that phrase shows, maybe it's not the only place where it shows up, but it is kind of an important place where it lays as the foundation of knowledge and wisdom, which is Proverbs all about. It says, the fear of the Lord, the fear of Yahweh is that. What does that mean? Okay. Yes. Respect. All right, love that. Somebody else over here? Okay, that's great.
If you actually fear the Lord, you know His justice.
Yes, okay.
For if you are against Him.
Yeah.
And by fearing God, you are more apt to obey Him and follow His commandments. That's why in the next verse it says, "But the fools despise wisdom and instruction."
Yeah, there you go.
So if you're actually fearing the Lord, you're going to stick to what He wants you to do and obey what He wants you to do. And in turn, by fearing Him, He's going to bless you.
Yeah. So one definition that I found, that I came across, was called filial fear, which is the idea of like loyal or faithful or allegiant fear. So it's more like I've handed my life over and I recognize who you are. So wisdom, wisdom is like, I want to take, we're going to see this in 1 through 9 if we have time, is that God has created the world in a wise way and we want to live in sync with that. And we want to have the knowledge of what God means for the world. And it's like we're trying to swim, I guess we're trying to swim with the current of God's wisdom and not the current of the world. We want to swim the current. So we're trying not to just know what direction it is going, but get with it. And in the fear of the Lord, as we are handing ourselves over to Him, we are giving Him our allegiant faith. Mr. Timmy, you were going to say something.
I saw a definition of wisdom.
Yeah. Godliness, yeah.
You just described it.
That's right. Yeah, I love the word godliness. It's like awareness that God is watching, that He knows us, that He sees us, and then we're trying to take every step with an awareness that God knows what that looks like.
We've actually got a better benefit of us being further down the timeline, that we can actually look back through all the way from the beginning, all the way through the end of the book, and see that if you don't fear the Lord and you do disobey, He shows many different times of utter destruction.
Yeah. You're saying we see it better than Solomon.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So we do see it in some. And the interesting thing is, think about this. He's inspired as he writes this. So it's like, that's pretty good insight. Like that's pretty good vision. He sees. But what does he do? He wonders what, right? He knows what wisdom is. He sees he has the knowledge. He knows what wisdom is, and then he wastes it. We talked about this a little bit the other night. Like, he sees what God's instructions and what it would be wise to live like a king, and he ruins it. And he comes back in the book of Ecclesiastes, I think, and gives us a wise reflection on how to live a good life. So I think you're right that not only do we see it better than him, like he has a kind of a roller coaster experience of that as well. Somebody else just was going to say, Raymond. Yes, sir. Mr. Raymond.
What I read in true wisdom is he recognizes true wisdom is the one that does it.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Yes. Yeah. So what we want to what the rest of the book. So let's kind of move on from this for just a second. Anything on 1 through 9 as far as introductory right now. So 10 through 29, what I think it is the way we ought to think about the book of Proverbs is that we've got our mindset on from 1 through 9. We've gotten the point that what we want to do is we want to find the current to get in that's wise, and we want to just hand ourselves over to the Lord and say, we are faithfully allegiant in respect of you. And 10 through 29 are hundreds of passages that talk about what God's wisdom is. And we'll talk more about that. I did read this week that I think 10 through 15 might be a little bit more like black and white. And maybe we'll look at some of that, and maybe on Sunday night, where it's just like, this is what happens to the righteous, this is what happens to the wicked. And then chapter 16 and following is more like, better is this than that, right? Like, you can live like this, but the wise way is, there's a better way than that. So maybe it's not maybe there are some levels of the kinds of proverbs that are there, and we'll talk more about that. But basically, those are the specific proverbs. But you've got them on all sorts of different themes, right? You've got them on work, you've got them on family, you've got them on alcohol, you've got them on words, you've got them on relationships with your neighbors and promises you make to them, you've got them on saving, you've got them on all sorts of things. And basically, what you can do is you can say, this is what a wise life looks like, and this is what a foolish life. I was trying to say way in life at the same time. Foolish life, way, looks like, which is not good. And then 30 and 31 are a little different. 30 is from a guy named Agur, and chapter 31 is from Lemuel. And the most famous part of 31 is about the virtuous woman. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit in some ways. Okay, any thoughts about all of this? Maybe that's not super helpful. I think 1 through 9, seeing how it kind of stands out from the rest of the book is helpful because it kind of gets your mindset. And that's what we want to talk about kind of now. Any questions about wisdom or fear of the Lord or any other words that we talked about? You might look at those first 7 verses or so. You kind of have this. This is kind of like the basic principle. The guide here is to know wisdom and discipline, to understand, to receive, to give prudence, and all of that. Okay. Now, here's the next step. Chapters 1 through 9, there are 2 parts. There are 9 or 10 speeches from a father to a son. So basically you'll see those because, for example, look at verse 8, hear my son. You'll have, now I say 9 or 10 because there are some that just keep going, and sometimes people break them up, and sometimes they don't. I counted them. I put 10 because that was the commentary I was looking at, but I could only count 9. That's how many I have on here. So you might see a place where like, oh, that's where I would break it up. So I just put 9 or 10 because, whatever. And then there are 4 speeches from Lady Wisdom is just kind of how she's described. And she doesn't really show up as much in the rest of the book. But these are kind of the 2 things in 1 through 9. And I think it's very helpful to see that because it helps us make sense of the passages. So what I'd like to do, and hopefully this will go well, is we'll look at, I'm just going to put these passages up there. We'll look at them. We won't read them all. We just can't tonight. Maybe you can when you go home if you're just so exuberated by all this. But what we'll do is we'll just make some comments on things that we notice that I think are helpful. And then if you see something that you say, hey, this is worth pointing out, then we'll be happy for you to do that for sure. And if we don't get them all covered, that'll be okay because these points, I think, kind of just show up from reading the text. So we'd be happy to hear from you for sure. All right, so looking at chapter 1, verses 8 through 19. One of the things that I think is interesting here, first he says, hear my son, your father's discipline. And I don't think when he means discipline here, he's talking about like, hear my getting on to you for doing wrong. I think it's training in preparation for what's coming ahead. It's here I want you to be a disciple in one way. And if you'll read from 8 through 19, what you will see is the call is, don't join in with these wicked partners. Basically, there are people out there who you can align with and just spend time with them, and the next thing you'll know is you'll be following down that path with them. So you really have a choice, right? Chapter 1, 1 through 7 says, here's wisdom, here's prudence, here's discipline. Here's a bunch of fools. Which one are you going to pursue? Which one are you going to spend time with? And I think both of those are important kind of things to think about. All right, then in verses 20 through 33 is the first speech from Lady Wisdom, where she says, why don't we just wait on the speeches from Lady Wisdom, if that's okay? We'll go through the father-son speeches, and then we'll come back to those Lady Wisdom things. You have anything on 8 through 19? Anybody else want to notice something from 8 through 19 in chapter 1 that you thought was interesting? A verse or a word or something that's interesting? Okay, looking at chapter 2, the second speech from the Father is you have verses 1 through 5, and notice all the different words that emphasize how you pay attention and seek and pursue. That this is not, Mr. Steve said, like, this is not just like something that you just like, well, I'll just learn it as I go. No, you got to chase it. You got to hunt it. You got to want it. And the people who want to be wise, they want to see the big picture. Really, it works in the world this way too, right? You pursue a kind of wisdom, you get it. Well, what kind of wisdom do we want? Well, we want divine wisdom. We want Yahweh's wisdom, and so we pursue that. What do you have through verse 15?
Just that, like what you said, he's talking about incline your ear, apply your heart to understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cry for discernment, lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver, if you seek her for a hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord. So it is like Larson just said. I mean, the text says like it's something that you actively have to do. Mm-hmm. It's not just something that you can kind of be around and just get. Like you have to be active in that.
That's right. And I love the conclusion of this chapter. For the upright will dwell in the land, and the blameless will remain in it, but the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be torn away from it. And I love that conclusion. But you might look at that and you might say, well, that seems short-sighted, or it seems like kind of like you only have a small circle of people that you know. Right? You only know some righteous people who are living, and wicked people who have been cut off. Like what? There's a couple of things. One, ultimately, in God's land, that's exactly the way it will work. And so, even if Solomon, maybe if this isn't the reality at that exact moment, it is the ultimate way it will be. And it's really the way it is in the land that really matters, which is in like relationship with God. And so I think it's okay for us to think in maybe like a bigger term than just like, yeah, there are a lot of wicked people out there who have lots of money, but they're not really living in the land, even if they're alive and they're not in relationship, and they're ultimately not going to live in the land that the whole Bible is ultimately pointing to. Anything through chapter 2 that you'd like to point out? Good passages here to look at.
I love the promise there of if you seek for wisdom, God will give you.
Yes.
I love that, and then what that means. So in verse 6, before you get wisdom, describe it a little bit. And then verse 12, talking about delivering you from the way of evil and all the different ways of protection. But I love that idea. You're seeking for it, which in itself may be a form of wisdom.
Yeah.
Seeking for wisdom may be.
Yeah, that's right.
But
that's good.
That there's a promise there.
Yeah.
You will get.
Yeah, as I was making my notes, it's kind of like you're seeking for it. Real wisdom always comes from God. And that wisdom will put you on a blessed life, and it will keep you away from those who are also, like you made mention of discretion will keep you, verse 11, discernment will guard you, right? So you're walking in the right path, you're being kept away from going down the wrong path, which it goes on to talk about, and then you're being preserved in the land. And then 16 through 19 is important, but we're going to talk about some of those in just a minute because there's a group of passages about an adulterous woman, and I want to say some just things in general about that. We don't have to go into a lot of detail at this exact second about that, but anyway, okay. So the next one is 3:1 through 12. You have any on 3:1 through 12 specifically?
12.
Okay.
13 through 18.
Oh, okay. So look at chapter 3. I think the key verse, maybe of a lot of this, is 3:5 through 8. We know this one well, and that's good. Trust in Yahweh, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. So the idea here, and I think this is that fear Yahweh language is used here, and I like the context that it's used in because what it's saying is you hand your will over to Him. That's what it means to fear Yahweh. You say, I trust that my good is up to you. And even if I might think this is not the best way forward, I trust that it will be because you are the God for wisdom. And so that's fear, right? That's what it means to give that filial faith to God. Yeah. Yes, please.
I really like knowing who said this.
Yes.
So when Solomon said, lean not on your understanding and be not wise in your own eyes.
Yeah.
That sense.
Mm-hmm.
Considering
his own understanding, his own wisdom. He's saying, you need to trust the Lord. That is saying.
Yeah, that's really good. Well done. Okay, let's skip a couple, and then if we want to come back to them, we can. We're going to skip the adultery ones and some of the other ones. Look at chapter 6. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 19. This one's very different. You probably have some ones on this one. This one has more like specific things, but they're kind of broad in some ways. So like 1 through 5. What did you think about 1 through 5?
Yeah, just talking about the words there. You know, you're ensnared by your words or what you've said. Don't be too proud to stick with that.
Yeah.
Humble yourself, and you know you can go back on your word and dealing with your friend. And give no sleep to your eye, no slumber to your eyelid. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of a hunter, like a bird from the hand of a fowler. And so, if you've made a bad promise or whatever, don't be too proud to try to undo that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just stick it out. Well, I said I was going to do this, so here we are. And so I think we try to make ourselves trustworthy, but sometimes we misspeak. And don't be too proud to say, well, people's going to call me a liar if I go back on this or whatever. Don't be too proud of yourself to make things right and to do what's best, I think is what it's saying here.
Yeah, I think you end up getting put in a bad situation, and you're trying to go to your neighbor and finding a way to make it forward, and that's important. I love verses 6 through 11 where it talks about going to the ant, right? So it's really kind of a 5 or 6 verse section. This was one of the only parts of the Proverbs that I think my dad ever taught me about was the ant, right? And working and preparing and looking forward, and just a really powerful, helpful way to think. Then you've got the picture in verses 12 through 15, where here's this person who's just characterized by deceit and discord, and just this horrible person, so that in verse 16, the little ones have memorized in drill class, which I love. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. Yea, 7 that are an abomination: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked thoughts, feet that hasten to run evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. And there might be, we'd say, well, there's other paths that you could go down that God hates too. It's like, yeah, but a lot of them can be characterized or kind of umbrellaed under these terms. And I think in the Psalms, I think a lot of here's how you notice a foolish person. I think those are the things that we're looking for in like Proverbs 10 through 29. I think those are the kinds of things. They're deceiving. They're creating discord. They're being angry. They're looking for opportunities to do others evil for their own success or whatever it might be. So as you go through the Proverbs and look for, well, what does foolishness look like? This is kind of a helpful summarizing text.
All those things happen today.
To who?
To David.
To David. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting to think about that, and maybe it's Solomon reflecting on that as he's being inspired. That's good. Miss Amanda, you were going to say something? Sorry.
I was going to say that people participate in these things every day, and they just think it's normal behavior.
Yeah.
Like this is how we act at work or school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but when you put it in these words, it really gets you to see the seriousness of it. The part right there, one who sows discord among brethren, that one gets me every time.
Yeah.
People do that, and they just think it's a game or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's serious to God.
Right. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. And like honestly, I think we have a good thing here, but I think it's something we have to work on, because there are places that I have been where discord being sown among brethren was very easy to happen. And maybe here a long time ago, I don't know. I don't feel like that's the case, but it's something we have to watch out for and prepare for, because what can happen is we get frustrated with things, or we get bothered by things people do, and instead of trying to create unification, and maybe it's something that's really wrong and we want to correct it, we need to go talk to them about it. A lot of times what happens is we kind of like split up into sides or into groups or whatever, and we pursue it that way, and we don't want to do that, right? Because we don't want to be people who discord brethren. And that's just something personally I think that is one of the things to me that is a good marker of the group here, but something we need to be always prepared about. So let's see. Anything? Well, let's go back. So if you put together 2:16 through 19. You don't have to write all these down, but you can kind of just keep these in mind. 2:16 through 19, chapter 5, 6, 20 through 35, and 7. I meant to turn those red. So 2:16 through 19, 5, 6, and 7. You have passages that talk about the danger, temptation, and person involved in adultery, the adulteress that's being presented, the danger of adultery that's coming out, and all of that. So the first one is just this little passage in 2:16 through 19. I'm going to read this really quick because I actually think it's pretty short, but I think it does a pretty good job kind of summarizing what the other passages talk about. 2:16. To deliver you from the strange, yours might say forbidden, or some other word, woman, from the foreign woman who flatters with the words, who forsakes the close companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God, for her house sinks down to death and her tracks descend to the depth. All right, so here's this woman who the son has no right to, right? She is forbidden, she is strange. She comes out, one, what kinds of things has she forsaken? She's forgotten her commitment to who? With God before that. Her companion of youth. I assume that's her husband, right? So here she's unfaithful to her husband. Well, why is that? Well, because she's unfaithful to her God. And then where does her house lead? Death, all right? This is a bad path to follow, right? So we've seen a lot in talking about doing the right thing, pursuing wisdom, fearing God, this leading to refreshment, this leading to life, leading to prosperity. We could see passages that talk about the blessings that come from pursuing the righteous path. But this is not that. Okay? Look at a couple. Do you have other passages? Did you want to say something about chapter 2, 16 through 19? Okay. One of these other passages like 5 or let's see, 6, 20 through 35 or 7 that specific points you wanted to make. I hate to open it up like that. It's okay. To make it hard on you, but
I mean, just the fact that's not God's design.
That's right.
I think is very important, and you can people try to bring up examples of godly men having multiple spouses, and you can look at every single case of those, and it does not turn out well. And so I think even though this is not talking about that exactly, mm-hmm. It's along the same line of thought that it's not God's design, it's not right, and we shouldn't be partaking in that.
Yeah, and I think some of these cases may be she's married, right, and she's pursuing it. So the chapter 5 is interesting because it's saying stay away, right? Like that's just the bold rule in chapter 5. It's not like it gets more complicated than that. It's like stay away, use what's your own, right? Like so maybe that's the situation with both here, right? She has her own and he has his own, and they're and he. So Solomon says, no, you use what's your, and which I know he has 1,000, right? And he's writing this down, but maybe this is on the front edge of that. That's what I would guess is on the front edge of that. You know, he gets old. What is it? We talked about that the other night in Bible class, 1 Kings 7 or something, that talks about him getting old and marrying all these wives. But anyway, and so chapter 6 is the passage that talks about a lot. Like, look at verse 27 of chapter 6. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Or can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? In other words, I think the men who would go into this would say, "Oh, this is going to be good, right? This is going to be a benefit. This is going to be something that helps me to something." And Solomon says, "No, you can't bring fire and hold it close to you and not be burned. You can't walk on it and not be scorched." So, yes, go ahead, read that for us. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So those are just illustrations that are pointing to this ultimate principle that you're killing yourself, man. Like this is not real wisdom. So, having said all of that, 7 would say more about it that we won't talk about right now. I think there's a possibility that these passages about adultery say even more than to a 22-year-old man. Right, or whoever else that it might be, that it says more to the person who is in the position of committing what we would say literal adultery. And the reason I say that is because I think that there's a chance that she's being compared to Lady Wisdom. So you have a few passages of Lady Folly. Now she's being presented as an adulterous woman who is making this promise of success and life and blessing, and really she leads to death. Now it's presented in very literal terms. And maybe that's kind of the initial way it was for Solomon to get his son to accept it. But I think that there's an application by which we all can make application of it. Here's the picture. We won't have a lot of time. But Lady Wisdom stands on one side and says, listen to me, right? I'm the means by which God made the world. I'm the way that you're going to get a life that really means something, that really counts for something in God's sight. Come, follow me. And she's like screaming it and yelling it everywhere like nobody's listening to her. But look at the difference in chapter 9. Chapter 9 and verse 13. This is why I think that there might be some idea that this other woman is kind of a comparative or contrasting representation. Look at 9:13. The woman of foolishness is boisterous, a woman of simplicity and does not know anything. So here's Lady Folly instead of Lady Wisdom. She sits at the doorway of her house on a seat by the high places of the city to call those who pass that way, who are making their path straight. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks a heart of wisdom, she says, stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that those she called are in the depths of Sheol. So I think what you have is you have Lady Folly calling people and saying, hey, this is the easy way. This is the sweet way. This will be nice. And I think a lot of people look at the way that's not following God's way and they say, yeah, that will be easy. It's going to be great. And they end up walking right into the house that leads to death. In contrast to the Lady Wisdom that we talk about. That's why I mentioned her in chapter 9, the end of chapter 9, with the lady in 2, 5, 6. Right? It's middle of 6 and 7. End of 6 and 7. Because I think there's a comparison there. All right, let's do it like this. Any spots from the Lady of Wisdom that you think is like, that's a good passage to look at from her? They're all good because they're inspired by God. But anyone you would like to point?
Lady Wisdom?
Yes, the middle of 3 is.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I really like 13.
Yes, that's a good one.
13 through 18. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding, for her proceeds are better than profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are always pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. And so I don't know about most of you, but I know when I was serious about trying to be happy in life, I said, how do I attain that? And that's following God and the wisdom in that. And so without that, you're not going to truly be happy in this life or in the life to come. And so I think that passage is helpful to me, that if I want to be happy, I need to be striving for wisdom. Yeah. And applying that as well. Yeah.
It's going to be better than all the things that earth could give you. I think that's a great one. Let me look at one passage really quickly. Chapter 8, verse 22. So this is kind of in the middle of one of her speeches. Lady Wisdom has a lot of good things to say. I like the idea that this is the means by which God created the world, and we want to kind of align with that. So I had a conversation with some Jehovah's Witnesses. This has been a long time. This is when I was at Buckhorn. It's not been that long, but it's been a while. And this was one of the main passages that they went to show that Jesus was a created being, right? That he was like the highest of the archangels and was not divine. Notice the language. Yahweh possessed me at the beginning of his way before his deeds of old. From everlasting I was installed from the beginning, from the earliest times of earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs heavy with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth, while he had not made the earth and the fields outside. So you see what's happening. Here's something that was created before the world was settled. And this is what my Jehovah's Witness conversation partners, this is what they said. This is talking about Jesus. He was made before the world. Well, you've done your reading tonight. Who is this talking? Wisdom, right? Now, there might be a way where we could say, oh, that's kind of like Jesus. He was the means by which God, but he wasn't brought forth then. He wasn't the means he wasn't created then. And so it's just, almost always, verse 12, I, wisdom, it's almost always helpful just to read like a paragraph before when somebody's trying to teach something. You just go back and you look at the context. We never understand a passage better when we understand the context. So chapter 12 is helpful there. Okay.
This can also be paired with chapter 3, 19-20. Talks about the Lord by wisdom.
Oh, yes. I think that's exactly right.
Even as like I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. And I think this just expands it out some. Yeah. Very good. Sorry to hold y'all up, guys. Come on in.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.